All right, question 18 here on the GRE practice test 1 in section 5. We again are told to answer a question with this little chart here. This chart, as you may remember if you watched the video on 17, lists a bunch of different drinks categorized by the type of drink and gives us a range for how much caffeine can be in that drink. Question 18 asks for how many of these 11, I guess they're not all drinks, categories of beverages and drugs, whatever, can the amount of caffeine in the given size be less than 50 milligrams? So the relevant benchmark is 50 milligrams. Maybe it would make sense to first find this on your graph. 50 is right here. This graph is going to be a disaster by the time I'm done with these 3 problems, 4 problems, whatever. So for how many of these 11 things could the amount of caffeine be less than 50? That's important. It's important to read this really carefully because, for example, percolated coffee apparently can have roughly 40 milligrams of caffeine all the way up to 170 give or take milligrams of caffeine. It's somewhere in that range. It's not always less than 50, but it certainly could be less than 50. So this one counts. Similarly, decaffeinated coffee, going to be less than 50. You could probably just guess that. Looks like that's somewhere from 0 to 10. What about drip brewed coffee? No, it cannot be less than 50 because as we figured out in question 17, the least it can possibly have is 60. So we're not going to count this one. Instant coffee, much like percolated coffee, could be less than 50 or it could be more than 50. So it certainly could be less than 50. Brewed tea, exact same idea, could be less, could be more. Instant tea, looks like it's always less, so it certainly could be less. Cocoa, always less, so it certainly could be less. Caffeinated soft drinks, usually less, sometimes more, certainly could be less. Weight loss drugs, diuretics, and stimulants, all right. Can't say I know a whole lot about those, but per this graph, they got a lot of caffeine in them. The least they can possibly have is 100, so they can't possibly have less than 50. I'm not going to count this category. I am going to count pain relievers because it could be less than 50, and I am going to count cold and allergy remedies because those are always less than 50. Count up my check marks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Looks like that's the answer, 9 categories. In hindsight, it might have been a little bit easier to look at this and be like, well, most of them could be less than 50 milligrams. In fact, there's only a few that could not be less than 50 milligrams. This drip brewed coffee, for example, could not be less than 50. And these weight loss drugs could not be less than 50. So my answer is all except for these 2. Since we're told in the problem that there's 11 categories, if 2 of them don't work, then 9 of them must work. I only mention that because it would be a real bummer if you did this all perfectly and miscounted your check marks or something and wrote 8 instead of 9. All right, that's enough with that.